Hi, good evening, everybody. Well, on behalf of McNally Robinson booksellers, thank you for joining us for this evening with Paul Hanley, speaking about his new book, 11. Paul has been an environmental columnist with the Saskatoon Star-Phoenix for 25 years. A recipient of the Canadian Environment Award, he has published several books and over 1,500 articles on the environment and agriculture. We are very pleased that he's here this evening to share some of his insights with us. Please welcome Paul Hanley.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming out and listening to me. And it's exciting to have people supporting a local author. And so I'd like to just tell you a few things about my book. And for some of you who have been to my other presentations, this will be a little bit different tonight. People have told me that one fellow in particular said that he tends towards depression. So he started reading my book, and it kind of contributed more to his depression. So I said, well, skip ahead a little bit, and he did, and you'll get to the parts that are hopeful. And I think essentially my book is quite hopeful. So I wanted to share with you tonight some of the hopeful things that I've identified in the book. But I'm going to start out by what I call reading our reality and just identifying what the key problems are that we have to think about. And one of them is population. Of course, the book 11 is about 11 billion people who are projected to be living on this planet in the year 2100. And that's the United Nations projection. It's the median projection. It could be a couple of billion fewer, it could be a couple of billion more. It all depends just on just a little fractionally how many children are born per woman. But it looks like 11 billion is the most likely figure. So this graph just shows you where population has been and where it's going. And very important is the annual growth rate. And as you can see, the good news is the growth rate is going down. So by the time we get to about 2100 and about 11 billion people, that's probably going to be more or less peak population. So there's good news and there's bad news. So the next thing, though, is the next aspect of this is how much stuff we produce, how much resources we consume, and how much waste we produce. And that's very tied to our gross world product. So how big is our economy? And that's even more alarming than population because it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So right now it's about $50 trillion in 1990 dollars, but it should increase about 5 times if things go as projected, which I don't think they will, by the way. And then the third element of this read of our reality is ecological footprint. So that's the impact we have on the planet. So sometimes this is expressed in Earth equivalents. And right now we're at about 1.6 Earth equivalents, which means we're overshooting Earth's biocapacity by about 60% already with 7 billion people. And if we get to 2100 with 11 billion people and the economy increases as it's projected to do, we would need about 4.8 planets to support us. So that is not good news, and obviously it just can't happen. So that's why I think there's going to be major changes coming. Really what we have to do is get to a place where we were at in 1974 when we were using basically one planet, the biocapacity of one planet. So it's the last time we really had a sustainable society. We were using one Earth equivalent with 4 billion people. So with 11 billion people, we have to get to that stage. And for that to work, I think we need to be a very different type of people than we are today. And really, we're going to have to change everything about our society. Now the question, is this possible? And is it too late? So I love this quote from Desmond Tutu. He says, "I'm a prisoner of hope." And so I'm with him, and I think that's what we all have to be. So I've come up with 15 reasons to be hopeful, and they're all included in my book. And the first one is it's not how many of us there are, but really what kind of people we are. So for example, I give this fellow Yakuba Sawadogo, who is an illiterate farmer from Burkina Faso. And he developed methods of reclaiming the desert. He started out with his own farm and reclaimed about 20 hectares, reforested it, developed a productive farm where there was desert before. But he didn't stop there, and he started working with all his neighbors, and they've reclaimed about 20,000 hectares. So it just shows the potential of one person. And if the 11 billion people in the world were that type of person, there's hope. I just picked this up out of the Star Phoenix today. I don't know, perhaps some of you saw this story. This fellow is a student at the University of Saskatchewan, and he just developed a new, what they call smart material that holds tremendous promise in absorbing pollution from water. And he wants to use this product in Lake Victoria, the world's largest tropical lake, which is pretty well denuded of all its fish already, to absorb the pollutants. So people like this are working and trying to come up with solutions, so that's one sign of hope. Second one, we're waking up. And Paul Hawken, very interesting person, you might have read his book called Blessed Unrest, and he talks about the world's largest movement is all of the people who are now trying to do good in terms of reforming our practices related to ecosphere and also social practices. So I just have one example. Last weekend I was at the Organic Connections Conference in Regina, which is the Organic Farmers Conference. And I was very active in the organic movement in the beginning in Saskatchewan in the 70s. And at that time there was one certified organic farmer in Saskatchewan, Alvin Shareski. And he wasn't even certified by a Canadian organization because there weren't any. He was certified by an American one. So right now there are about 1,000 certified organic farmers farming between 1 and 1.5 million acres in Saskatchewan. And so I think, things like this are really signs of hope. Here's an idea that's important: ecological function first. And it's something that works. So if we pay attention to ecosystems, to the well-being of ecosystems, to sustainability, more benefits come than from not doing it. So just to give you an example, which I talk about in the book too, it's about the reclamation of the Loess Plateau in China. And the Loess Plateau was one of the first areas in the world that was ever farmed, one of the cradles of civilization. And it's about the size of France. It's in northern China. And it's completely degraded. It's almost a desert. It's considered the most degraded place on the planet. But local people, in collaboration with the national government, UN agencies, the World Bank, got together and started a reclamation project which has now reclaimed an area the size of Belgium. So you can see the before and after pictures and the reforestation that's taken place. And interestingly, this has resulted in incredible increase in wealth for the small farmers in the area. So really, ideas can change landscapes. So the upper picture is before, the lower one after, and you can see it now retreed and being used to grow food again. So alternatives like this work. We talk about, it's very important to think about urban transformation because most of the people already live in cities, but by the year 2100, it'll probably be about 3/4 of the planet, if not more, living in cities. So the way we transform cities is extremely important. This is a picture of Seoul, Korea, and you can see this massive roadway running through the center of the city. It's actually covering over a small river, which was the reason why Seoul was located in this place in the first place. It was because of this river. So gradually the river became polluted, became an eyesore, so it was just covered with concrete and became a major roadway. But this is what it looks like now. So it's exciting to see people transforming landscapes urban landscapes in a major way. The interesting thing about this project was that, well, of course, biodiversity was increased. People flocked to the area, and interestingly, the temperature in the core area of Seoul decreased by 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Traffic improved instead of getting worse, which was very strange. This has been found in a number of places. San Francisco is one where during the last big San Francisco earthquake, a lot of the overhead freeways collapsed and they weren't rebuilt. And they found that people were still able to get around the city. They just adapted and they never rebuilt them. So it's possible to transform car culture in cities. And even politically it worked because the mayor of Seoul is now the president of South Korea. Another example is this turnaround of the German energy system. So we have one of the world's largest industrial countries, and their primary energy use is down dramatically, their CO2 emissions down, renewable energy is dramatically up. And they're aiming to decrease energy consumption further and reduce CO2 emissions to 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. So a complete turnaround of the German energy economy. I often think of Norway as a really interesting example. And Norway has become a very egalitarian society. The difference between the richest and the poorest is much lower than so many other countries in the world. What they've done is taken their non-renewable resources and used them for the benefit of everybody in the country, not just the wealthy. And they only use 10% of the revenues, set aside 90%. Now in places like Saskatchewan, we just take all the money from non-renewable resources and spend it on immediate needs. So here they've set aside close to $1 trillion. So when their oil runs out, they'll have the same income as when they had oil. Now, they say that you can't look after the environment and the economy at the same time, but Norway is now going to use some of this money to become carbon neutral by 2030. And it doesn't seem to have hurt them, because they're #1 on the UN Development Index. They're in the top 10 of most indexes of well-being, and they're on the bottom of the one that you want to be in the bottom of, which is the Failed State Index. So, progress is evident. Everything that needs to be done to make an 11 billion world work is being done somewhere successfully already. Now this one may seem at first like a negative, but I think it's hopeful. And that is that economic growth eventually becomes uneconomic growth. So you actually start to have more illth than wealth. And illth is kind of like the opposite of wealth. It's like bad wealth. And the economist Herman Daly, very interesting person, he used to be the chief economist with the World Bank, but he's now a main advocate for a stable state society. And he talks about how the utility that our economy develops is decreasing and the disutility is increasing, and how eventually we'll get to a futility limit. So for example, our economy is basically producing climate change. That produces massive storms, and the number of billion-dollar storm events is steadily increasing over the last few decades. So at what point, when the water rushes into New York City, they have to start thinking about, our hustle and bustle, our growing economy, is it really worth it? At some point we hit a futility limit.